What if the strongest number in this World Cup final is not 8, not 5, and not even 19? What if it is 9? The final between Argentina and Spain takes place on July 19th, 2026. If we add every digit in that complete date together, we get 27. 2 plus 7 gives 9. That means the entire final sits inside one of numerology's most emotionally loaded numbers, the number of completion, release, culmination, farewell, and the closing of a cycle. That matters more than it may sound, because individual numbers can describe players, shirts, ages, and even nations. But the full date often behaves like the atmosphere that contains everything else. It is the symbolic room in which the story unfolds. And when that room is a 9, the match begins to feel less like a simple contest for a trophy and more like the final chapter of a much larger emotional narrative. Tonight, I want to stay inside that number and ask one question. Does the 9 around this final make it more likely to feel like the ending of an era rather than the full arrival of a new one? This is symbolic storytelling, not science or betting advice. Football still belongs to the players, tactics, chance, pressure, and moments that no symbolic system can own. But numerology can help us understand why certain matches feel heavy before they begin, as if they were carrying unfinished emotional business from a much longer story. And 9 is exactly that kind of number. Let us start with what 9 really means. In numerology, 9 is the last single digit. That alone gives it enormous symbolic force. 1 begins the cycle. 9 completes it. 9 gathers what came before, brings the pattern toward maturity, and asks what must now be released, finished, understood, or transformed. 9 is not only about endings in the narrow sense. It is about completed meaning. It is the number that says a story has become fully itself and is now ready to be remembered rather than merely continued. That is why 9 often carries emotions that feel older than the present moment. It can feel reflective. It can feel solemn. It can feel compassionate, wise, or tragic. It can also feel beautiful because there is a unique beauty in anything that reaches full form before it disappears or changes shape. This is important because many people misunderstand 9 as a negative number simply because it is associated with endings. But 9 is not automatically loss. Very often, 9 is fulfillment. It is the final page, written exactly the way the story needed it to be written. The emotion can still be painful, but the structure feels complete. That is why 9 is so powerful in a major final. A World Cup final is already a natural theater for completion. Careers bend toward it. Nations attach memory to it. Legends get confirmed or complicated by it. Young players can enter history through it. Old players can leave history through it. The match is never only about 90 minutes. It is about how a whole era gets compressed into one visible event. And 9 is the number most suited to that kind of compression. Now think about the exact contrast inside this final. On one side stands Messi, the veteran icon whose career already exists inside a near-mythic frame. On the other side stands Yamal, the teenager whose future seems to be trying to arrive faster than normal. Between them sits a date that reduces to 9. That is not a neutral symbolic environment. 9 does not naturally behave like a teenage number. 9 behaves like a summing up number. It asks, what is the meaning of everything that came before this? That question inevitably pulls the emotional center of the reading toward Messi more than toward Yamal. Not because Yamal lacks destiny, not because the future does not matter, but because 9 is much more interested in closure than in first arrival. If the date of the final had reduced to 1, the reading would feel different. 1 would highlight initiation, emergence, new identity, and the energy of stepping into a fresh era. If it had reduced to 5, it would feel wilder, more unstable, more open to disruption. If it had reduced to 8, it would feel more purely material and trophy-centered. But it reduces to 9, and 9 asks us to think about legacy. There is another reason 9 feels so heavy in sport. 9 does not only describe what ends. It describes what becomes interpretable as a whole. That is a different thing. A story can stop without becoming meaningful. But when 9 is active, events often feel as though they are not merely stopping. They are being gathered, judged, and emotionally understood all at once. That is exactly how legendary careers get watched in their final stages. Every movement stops belonging only to the present. The audience begins measuring it against years of memory. Every touch is compared with old touches. Every expression is read like a footnote to a much larger biography. That widening of perspective is profoundly 9-like. Yamal does not naturally sit inside that kind of completed frame yet. The audience watches him asking, what comes next? The audience watches Messi asking what everything already meant. That contrast is almost the entire emotional DNA of this final. One figure is being watched as an inheritance question. The other is being watched as a meaning question. In a one-number environment, those two things might be balanced differently. In a 9 environment, meaning tends to pull harder than inheritance. This does not mean the match is already written. It means the match may be experienced through the lens of conclusion, whether or not that conclusion belongs to the team or player that social media expects. That distinction matters. Numerology is not always about naming the winner directly. Sometimes it tells us what kind of emotional story the event is most likely to become. And the emotional story of a 9 is almost always one of reflection, finality, release, and completed arcs. That is why 9 can create a strange mix of tension and calm at the same time. The tension comes from knowing something important is reaching its edge. The calm comes from sensing that the edge itself may be deserved, almost as though the story has earned the right to become complete. In a World Cup final, that feeling can be overwhelming. It can also make the match feel older than the players on the field. That is one of the strangest effects of 9. The game may still be fast, technical, tactical, and modern, but emotionally it can feel as if history itself is sitting in the stadium, waiting to see whether the ending arrives in a form worthy of memory. That takes us to Messi. Messi's core numerology already contains a strange harmony with the way 9 works in public memory, even though he is not himself a life path 9. Messi is a life path 1. 1 is the pioneer, the ruler, the first name, the figure who must stand alone and open a path. His birthday number 6 adds duty, responsibility, and the burden of carrying collective emotion. His attitude number 3 adds expression, beauty, artistry, and imagination. So what does that mean inside a 9 final? It means the pioneer is being placed inside the final room of the cycle. The artist is being asked whether one last image remains. The carrier of national emotion is being placed under the number most associated with release and culmination. That is an extraordinarily dramatic fit. Messi also enters the final at 39 years old, and 39 reduces to 3. His personal day on July 19th reduces to 3 as well. So even inside the heavier closing atmosphere of 9, his chart still keeps returning to expression, image, and the possibility of one memorable act. That matters because 9 alone can feel large and abstract, but when it interacts with Messi's repeated 3 energy, it becomes more specific. It suggests not only an ending, but an ending that may be remembered through a gesture of beauty, timing, imagination, or a single act of football that crystallizes the era. In other words, 9 may not simply want Messi to exist in the frame. It may want him to be the symbol that completes the frame. That possibility makes this match feel less like a random final and more like a public act of recognition. The audience may not even realize it consciously, but the 9 atmosphere can make people look for a closing image before the image has appeared. They expect summary. They expect echo. They expect a scene that turns years of greatness into one final understandable picture. If Messi delivers that picture, the number will feel perfectly aligned. If he does not deliver it directly, 9 may still attach itself to his presence, his expression, or the way the cameras return to him at the emotional hinge of the match. That is why even small, messy moments could become huge in this final. A pause before a free kick, a slow walk after a missed chance, a glance toward the crowd. Under ordinary numerical conditions, those might remain details. Under 9, they can become symbols because the public is already reading him as a nearly completed text. Now compare that with Yamal. Yamal carries the famous 19 pattern. 19 reduces to 1. 1 is emergence, naming, identity, beginning, and the pressure of a new role. His personal year is 3, which amplifies visibility and public breakthrough. His personal day on the final returns to 2, the number of connection, timing, and partnership. That is a rich and exciting chart, but it does not feel like 9's natural favorite for full ownership of the emotional ending. Why? Because Yamal's symbolism is still trying to begin. 9 does not reject beginnings, but it usually frames them through what is ending first. A beginning can absolutely appear inside a 9. In fact, many beginnings emerge precisely because something older has now finished. But 9 does not usually make the beginning feel total. It makes it feel contextual. The new story is visible because the old story has reached completion. That is a subtle but essential difference. And it is why saying that 9 favors closure is not the same thing as saying 9 rejects youth. A young player can become unforgettable inside a 9 final. He can even become the most exciting force in the stadium. What 9 resists is the feeling that the old story does not deserve its full accounting first. This matters for how we interpret Yamal's possible brilliance. If he dazzles, 9 may frame that brilliance as the clearest announcement of what comes after the ending. If he decides the match, 9 may frame it as a transfer through closure rather than a random breakout. Either way, the old story still remains part of the explanation. That is how powerful 9 is. It pulls beginnings into relation with endings. So when people ask whether the full date supports Yamal's complete takeover, my answer is not quite. It may support his visibility. It may support his symbolic arrival. It may support the sense that the future has stepped into the stadium. But 9 does not feel like a clean number of youthful seizure. It feels like a number that wants the old story to receive its full emotional accounting first. That is why E02 could lean toward Yamal owning the mythic spotlight in parts of the match, while E04 still leans toward the overall 9 atmosphere favoring the older arc of completion. Both can be true at once. The audience can feel the future. The date can still honor the ending. That duality is exactly what makes the final so compelling. It also makes this reading stronger than a flat winner pick. Plenty of people will talk about who is faster, fresher, more dangerous, or more likely to score. The 9 reading asks a deeper question. Whose story is this date most ready to make whole? And once you ask that question, the whole atmosphere changes. Suddenly, you are not only measuring form, you are measuring narrative ripeness. You are asking whether the match feels like a loose possibility or a final reckoning. 9 usually prefers reckoning. Now, let us connect 9 to the other major numbers around the match, because 9 does not exist alone. The month and day, July 19th, reduced to 8. 8 is power, material result, visible authority, and the trophy itself. Argentina's name also reduces to 8. So on the surface layer of the final, Argentina is strongly aligned with the object of the night. Spain, meanwhile, reduces to 23 and then to 5. The tournament is the 23rd Men's World Cup. So Spain aligns beautifully with the event's change, energy, youth disruption, and momentum. So where does 9 sit among 8 and 5? 9 sits above them as narrative container. 5 may describe the storm. 8 may describe the crown. 9 describes what the whole night means when the noise is over. That is why I keep calling it the room around the story. If 5 dominates, the match can feel fast, young, unstable, and full of tomorrow. If 8 dominates, The match can feel controlled, consequential, and materially decisive. But whichever force wins the tactical or visual argument, 9 asks a different question at the end. What was this night really closing? That question changes how even the highlights may be remembered later. A goal will not only be replayed for its quality, it will be replayed for whether it looked like succession, fulfillment, farewell, or final proof. 9 turns moments into verdicts. That is one reason why I would expect the most enduring image from this final to feel emotionally legible very quickly. Some matches need time before the public agrees on what they meant. A 9 match often reveals its symbolic center faster. People look at the scene and immediately sense, yes, that was the closing image, or yes, that was the transfer image, or yes, that was the moment the era finally crossed its line. That is the question that pulls us back toward legacy. And legacy, in this final, is impossible to discuss without Messi. Even if someone wants to resist the mythological layer and talk only about football, the cultural reality is still there. Messi is not just another older star. He represents an emotional era. The audience has already learned to watch him through the language of memory, farewell, gratitude, and final chances. 9 amplifies exactly that emotional grammar. It takes what the audience is already feeling and gives it symbolic structure. That is why the final may feel heavier every time the camera finds him. That is why every touch from him may seem connected to something larger than the action itself. That is why a simple pass, a set piece, or 1/2 second of composure could feel like a summary rather than just a moment. 9 makes events feel like summaries. That may be the simplest sentence in the whole reading. And summaries are never neutral. They decide what matters. They reduce years into one felt conclusion. That is why people argue so fiercely about historic finals after they end. They know the match will become memory, and they are fighting over what kind of memory it will be. 9 intensifies that fight because 9 itself is a memory-making number. It does not leave events raw for very long. It starts shaping them into emotional meaning almost immediately. Now consider what that means for Spain and Yamal. If Spain wins, 9 would not vanish. It would simply tell a different ending story. It would say the old era has been closed decisively, and the new era has entered through the most public door available. That is still a 9 type event because something complete has ended. So E04 is not saying 9 guarantees Argentina. It is saying 9 makes the match much more about closure than about raw arrival. That difference still matters. If Argentina wins, the symbolism feels especially clean. The old cycle closes through visible possession of the trophy, the dates 8 and 9 work together, and Messi's completed public mythology receives one more chapter of material confirmation. If Spain wins, the symbolism becomes harsher but still coherent. 9 then means the old order has truly finished, and the new generation does not merely appear, but inherits through closure. In both versions, 9 insists that something major is ending. What I do not see as strongly in the 9 is the feeling of casual continuation. This does not look like just another final. It looks like an accounting. That is why the emotional stakes seem so high even before kickoff. People are not only debating which team is better, they are debating what this match is allowed to mean. 9 intensifies that instinct. It tells the public, yes, this is not only a game. This is a hinge in the story. Something you have been watching for years is about to become past tense. And because 9 is often compassionate as well as final, it can give an ending dignity instead of brutality. That is another reason it feels closer to Messi's side of the emotional map. Even when 9 closes something, it often does so with reverence. It acknowledges value before release. That is very different from the energy of a number like 5, which is happy to disrupt without ceremony, or 1, which is happy to begin without looking back. 9 looks back. 9 remembers. 9 asks whether the story received the ending it earned. That makes it a devastatingly appropriate number for a final involving a player whose career is already treated as a public memory while he is still active. Now, let us talk about why 9 can also create iconic images. Completion is visual. It lends itself to symbols the audience can instantly understand. A final embrace, a slow walk, a look at the scoreboard, a pass that becomes the last beautiful proof, a trophy lifted not only as a victory, but as a full stop. 9 wants that kind of image because 9 is a summarizing number. It condenses years into one scene. That is why E04 is not only a prediction video, it is also a framing video. It tells us what kind of moment to watch for. Do not only watch for speed. Do not only watch for who looks younger. Watch for the moment that feels like a sentence closing. Watch for the gesture that makes the entire story suddenly easy to describe. That is usually where 9 reveals itself. And if the match never finds that kind of image, then the 9 reading was too strong. But if the final gives us one unforgettable closing picture, then the number will feel almost embarrassingly appropriate afterward. There is another layer here that should not be ignored. 9 often asks people to release attachment to what they cannot control. That is especially relevant to viewers before a final. Everyone wants certainty. Everyone wants a clean prophecy. Everyone wants one number to solve the whole event in advance. 9 resists that. 9 says the meaning may matter more than the control. The point is not to dominate the future in advance. The point is to understand what kind of human experience is ripening on the edge of the event. That is actually a practical advantage for this channel. If you know the final is vibrating with 9, you stop searching only for chaos or certainty. You start watching for gravity, closure, inheritance, emotional recognition, and the one image that can compress a whole era into a single moment. That lens can even calm the viewer before kickoff. Instead of demanding an impossible certainty from the future, you begin asking a better question. If this night is truly a 9, what kind of ending is it trying to become? That is why 9 can be a strangely calming number as well. It does not eliminate intensity. It changes the relationship to it. It reminds us that some nights matter precisely because they cannot be repeated, paused, or reduced to data alone. They are meaningful because they close something for good. That is exactly what the World Cup final can do. Now, let us answer the big question directly. Does the full date 9 make this final feel more like the ending of an era than the total beginning of a new one? My answer is yes. Not because the new era is absent, not because Yamal is not important, but because 9 bends the emotional weight of the night toward completion first, and only then toward whatever comes next. That is the heart of E04. If you want the shortest possible summary, it is this: 1 announces, 5 disrupts, 8 possesses, 19 initiates, 9 completes. When a final is built on 9, the question becomes less who grabs the stage fastest, and more whose story is most ready to become whole. And in a final where one side carries a world-famous completed legend and the other carries a world-famous beginning, that is not a small distinction. It may be the distinction that explains the entire emotional mood of the night. 9 supports fulfillment, closure, and completed legacy more naturally than immediate youthful takeover. So if you ask me which side fits the full date atmosphere more cleanly, I still lean toward Messi and Argentina at the symbolic level, especially when the dates 8 and Argentina's 8 are standing underneath the 9 as the material layer of the story. That does not erase Spain's claim on the future. It simply says the date itself may prefer to seal a chapter before it opens the next one fully. And that is why this final may end up feeling historic, even if the football is tight and pragmatic. 9 does not require chaos to create significance. Sometimes it creates significance by making a simple moment feel final in the deepest sense of the word. So when the match begins, watch for closure. Watch for the way cameras linger. Watch for which player seems surrounded by memory rather than only possibility. Watch for whether the decisive image looks like an opening door or a closing circle. Then let the football decide which version of the ending becomes real. You can leave your own reading in the comments, but there is no need to force every event into a rigid prophecy. Sometimes numerology is most valuable when it helps us notice the emotional shape of a moment more clearly, not when it pretends to dominate the moment itself. Whatever the final score becomes, this date already feels like a 9, and that means somebody's chapter is about to become complete. Thank you for spending this time with Hidden Number Files, and take care until we meet again.